Beneath the dim glow of neon lights and the pounding beats echoing through Itaewon, the Seoul neighborhood famous for its nightlife, no one could have imagined that just a few hours later, this place would turn into the scene of one of the most heartbreaking tragedies in modern Korean history. "159 lives lost, hundreds more injured, and millions of hearts shattered. Halloween night of 2022, a night that should have been filled with joy, descended into a collective nightmare. They call it the Itaewon Tragedy. But this is not just a story of numbers or cold statistics. It is the story of cries for help swallowed by music, of shoes abandoned in the chaos, of desperate last messages sent to parents. It is the story of a system's helpless collapse and a searing lesson about trust, survival, and responsibility. Part 1. The Ordinary Days Before the Nightmare. Seoul, October 2022. After 3 long years under the shadow of COVID-19, South Koreans could finally breathe the air of true festivity again. For the first time since 2019, restrictions on gatherings were lifted. Masks were no longer barriers on their faces. Bars, restaurants, and nightclubs glowed brightly once more. The young were eager, the older generations relieved. People wanted to live, to breathe, to taste that new normal they had dreamed of for so long. Among all the long-awaited events, nothing was more anticipated than Halloween night in Itaewon. Located in the heart of Seoul, right beside the U.S. military base, Itaewon had long been seen as the capital's international playground, a melting pot of culture, cuisine, and endless nightlife. If Hongdae was known for art students and Gangnam for luxury, then Itaewon was the holy ground of parties, where anyone could become anyone they wanted on Halloween night. The streets of Itaewon were already crowded on a normal day, but during festivals, the number of visitors multiplied many times over. That year, at least 100,000 people were expected. They came from across Seoul, nearby provinces, and even from abroad. Koreans wanted to celebrate their first post-COVID Halloween. Tourists wanted to experience Korea's most electrifying festival night, and all of them poured into a neighborhood that was little more than a cluster of narrow streets. Excitement in every household. For many young people, October 29th felt like a milestone day. They spent hours putting on makeup, choosing costumes. Halloween shops sold out early. Social media overflowed with photos of costumes and excited posts. "See you in Itaewon. Tonight has to be explosive." Parents were anxious, yet reassured. They knew their children would go out, but trusted that Seoul, one of the most modern cities in the world, would be safe. No one could imagine disaster. To them, Halloween was simply a night for youth to let loose after years of restraint. One 25-year-old daughter texted her father, "Mom, Dad, enjoy your dinner tonight. Thank you for raising me. One day I'll repay you." She didn't know it would be her last message, just hours before she lost her life in the suffocating Itaewon alley. Elsewhere, a father laughed as his daughter spun around in her jasmine costume. "You're grown up now, but still showing off your outfits to Dad?" He didn't know that only a few hours later, he would learn his daughter had died in the crush. The city prepared, but not enough. Everyone knew Halloween would draw massive crowds. Bars doubled their staff and stocked up on alcohol. Restaurants prepared extra ingredients. Taxis lined up around the area, ready to drive drunken partygoers home. For businesses, this was the golden season, the chance to recover after 2 bleak years of pandemic. But the most important preparation was left undone: crowd safety. Itaewon was a small neighborhood of winding, narrow alleys, many just 4 to 5 meters wide, built on sloping ground. The infamous alley beside the Hamilton Hotel, connecting the subway station to the food street, was less than 50 meters long, but it was the lifeline of the district. Anyone entering or leaving the center had to pass through it. In every large gathering, controlling crowd flow is life or death. Yet that night, only about 100 police officers were assigned to manage 100,000 people. No barricades, no one-way lanes, no emergency plan. Warning calls about pushing and shoving began reaching police as early as 6 p.m., but they went largely unanswered. The illusion of the land of joy. Still, none of this mattered to the partygoers. All they saw were flashing lights, pounding music, laughter, and cheers. Itaewon had always been crowded, always chaotic, and nothing bad had ever happened before. That complacency, combined with the hunger for joy after 3 years of isolation, funneled tens of thousands into those narrow alleys. Step by step, they were walking closer to one of the darkest nights in Korea's history. Part 2. The screams silenced in the crowd. Warnings ignored around 6 p.m., the first calls began pouring into the 112 emergency hotline. Citizens warned that the narrow alley beside the Hamilton Hotel was already dangerously overcrowded. One panicked young woman begged, "It's so crowded here. People are pushing. I can't breathe. Please send police." But the only response she got was, "We'll look into it." 3 hours later, as more and more people flooded in, additional calls were made. Some even rushed directly to the nearby police station to report the danger. Yet all of it vanished into silence. No barriers, no rerouting, no control. Meanwhile, the subway kept unloading fresh waves of partygoers into Itaewon, like a waterfall pouring endlessly into a glass that was already overflowing. Stepping into the invisible trap. By 8 p.m., the sloping alley beside the Hamilton Hotel was packed solid. Hundreds were jammed shoulder to shoulder, inching forward like marbles stuck in a funnel. Some tried climbing the walls, scrambling onto awnings to escape. A few shouted, "Stop pushing! I can't breathe." But from behind, drunken voices roared, "Move! Keep going! Down the hill!" The pressure from both directions turned the crowd into a solid mass. No space, no choices. Everyone was swept along, whether they wanted to move or not. One survivor recalled, "Suddenly, my feet left the ground. I wasn't walking anymore. I was being lifted and carried by the crowd. I knew I was powerless." The domino effect of death by 9 p.m., the first clear signs of disaster struck. One person slipped and fell. Instantly, rows of people behind toppled forward like dominoes. Screams tore through the night, only to be swallowed by the dense air. "Help me! I can't breathe!" Within minutes, dozens were crushed against the uneven brick slope, unable to move. Some tilted their heads back, desperate for air, but everywhere was blocked by shoulders, chests, and backs. Those trapped in the center were forced to stare upward, eyes bloodshot, mouths gaping. Many collapsed unconscious while still standing. A survivor later recalled, "I heard screams right next to my ear." Then silence. The person beside me died while still on their feet. Their eyes were open, but the light was gone. A glimpse of hell. Inside the alley, the scene was hellish. People clawed at each other, stepping on shoulders, desperate for breath. Some tried to raise their hands to create chest space, but most couldn't even lift an arm. One popular live streamer captured his own descent from laughter to terror. At first, he cheerfully greeted viewers, describing the lively crowd. But within minutes, the music was drowned by screams. His face twisted in panic. "Help me! Someone pull me out!" A stranger in a blue denim jacket yanked him onto a ledge, saving his life. That same man stayed in the crush afterward, helping others climb out. Witnesses believe he saved at least 10 lives that night. When life and death were separated by a breath by 10 p.m., the disaster had reached its peak. Hundreds were trapped, bodies stacked layer upon layer. Many were heartbreakingly young, some just 15 or 16. One girl stuck in the chaos managed to call her mother. "Mom, I'm so scared. I can't breathe." Those were her final words. Her phone fell, screen still glowing, as the line dissolved into chaos. In another corner, a Malaysian man phoned his friend. "It's so tight, I can't breathe." "There's a girl next to me who's fainted. I'm trying to hold her up." Moments later, the call cut off. He too was gone. Chaos on the streets. While the alley turned into a nightmare, the rest of Itaewon still pulsed with neon lights and pounding bass. Some bars shut their doors thinking drunks were causing trouble. Others kept blasting music, their patrons dancing, unaware that just meters away, dozens were suffocating to death. As news spread, ambulances began arriving, but the alley was too narrow. Vehicles couldn't get through. Paramedics sprinted in on foot, carrying stretchers, dragging bodies out. CPR was performed on sidewalks under neon lights as partygoers stared, but for many it was too late. A sea of shoes and lost belongings. By the time the crowd finally thinned, the alley was littered with tragedy. Shoes scattered everywhere, bags and phones abandoned across the bricks. Over a ton of personal belongings was collected and laid out in a nearby gymnasium for families to identify. Parents collapsed when they recognized a familiar shoe, a purse, a phone. The grim numbers. At dawn, the world awoke to the horrific tally: 159 dead, nearly 200 injured. More than two-thirds were women, many in the prime of their lives. They had come only to celebrate, to taste a night of joy. But instead, they died gasping for air, crushed in an invisible tide of humanity. Part 3. Aftermath and Lessons. The system's failure exposed. When dawn broke over Seoul, the shock had turned into rage. Families of the victims, journalists, and citizens all asked the same question: how could this have happened in one of the most modern cities in the world? The warnings had been there. Dozens of calls to the police hotline, eyewitnesses running to the station, even live streams showing the danger hours before tragedy struck. Yet the response was absent. Only about 100 officers had been deployed to an area expecting 100,000 people. None were tasked with controlling the flow of the crowd. Later investigations revealed even darker truths. Senior police officials had ignored or downplayed the warning calls. Some even tried to cover their tracks by destroying internal reports. The head of the local police was found dining leisurely while the disaster unfolded, choosing to drive through traffic instead of walking 10 minutes to his station. He arrived far too late. This wasn't just an accident. Many families called it what they believed it was: murder by negligence, grief that cannot be measured. At funeral homes across Seoul, parents clung to the last remnants of their children: a handbag, a phone, a pair of shoes. Some collapsed to the floor the moment they saw familiar belongings laid out on tables. One father, who had received a bone marrow transplant from his daughter years earlier, sobbed at her funeral. "You told me to live another 70 years, to make seaweed soup for you even when you were old. How can I now live without you?" Another mother whispered at her daughter's casket. "She was my best friend. Now I have no one." The grief was unbearable. Families gathered at press conferences, screaming through tears, "Take us instead. Bring our children back." Anger turns to demands. The South Korean government faced immense criticism. Officials initially offered condolences and money for funeral expenses, but parents rejected the gesture. "We don't need your money," one father said. "We need accountability. We need justice." Protests erupted across the country. Citizens lit candles, held vigils, and demanded answers. To many, this was not just about Itaewon. It was about a broken system that had failed before. In the 2014 Seoul ferry disaster, where over 300 students drowned while authorities hesitated. The memories of Seoul were still raw, and now Itaewon reopened those wounds. Heroes amid the horror. Yet within the tragedy, stories of humanity shone. The man in the blue denim jacket who lifted strangers to safety, the photographer who shielded women in front of him to keep them from falling, the nurse visiting from Pakistan who performed CPR on over 20 victims through the night, drenched in sweat but refusing to stop. Even in the darkest hour, there were those who chose to save others. A nation forever changed. The Itaewon tragedy left scars not only on families, but on an entire country. Businesses in Itaewon saw their streets empty. Survivors carried lifelong trauma, physical injuries, nightmares, survivor's guilt. The parents carried unbearable grief, some saying they could never set foot in Seoul again. Most of all, South Korea was left with questions that demanded answers. Why were the warnings ignored? Why was safety neglected in the name of celebration and profit? And how many more lives must be lost before change comes? The final lesson: Halloween night in Itaewon was supposed to be about joy, laughter, and freedom after years of isolation. Instead, it became a collective nightmare that revealed how fragile safety can be when responsibility is abandoned. The tragedy reminds us that blind faith in systems and authorities, in the idea that it won't happen here, can be deadly. 159 lives were lost. But if the world remembers, if lessons are learned, perhaps their deaths will not be in vain. As one parent said through tears, Please serve our children justice on their way to heaven. Don't forget Itaewon. Thank you for watching until the end. Don't forget to click subscribe to follow the next videos from Mr. Bin's story.